Hello and welcome to the show. Let me turn this music off. I don't know how to do all the buttons here. Hello and welcome to the show. This is our second show. We did one unannounced show last week. We're going to jump right into the show this week. Actually, I just want to get right into the conversation, so I'm going to introduce our crew real fast. I am Dan Larson. We have Kate, who's going to be keeping an eye on chat. Say hello, Kate.
Hello.
There we go. And then also joining us today, we have the guy who literally wrote the book on the Masters of the Universe action figures. We have Pixel Dan. Dan, how you doing tonight?
Hey, what's going on, Dan? I'm good. Thanks for having me, man.
Excellent. All right, we're going to keep this moving, and we're going to bring in next on Secret Galaxy is live stream is his second appearance on the show. Is the voice of Orko on Masters of the Universe Revelations. We have Griffin Newman. Griffin, how are you tonight?
I'm doing all right. I feel left out of the Dan Club, but otherwise I'm doing well.
For tonight, you can be an honorary Dan. I can just go right in here and change your name if you want.
Yeah, make me Griff Dan. Yeah.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you for taking some time and
pleasure.
chatting Masters of the Universe. I know you both don't have a problem doing that at any time of day.
I talk about it way too much. I mean,
have you both had a chance to watch Revelation and Revolution?
I have, which I will say I have not watched everything that I've worked on. Some things I have pointedly avoided.
I did not want to assume being a part of it and shooting and filming, and that's not the same as actually sitting down and watching.
No. I devoured them. I was eagerly pestering to get links so I could watch them as soon as I could.
All right. And Dan, you have watched both.
I have, yes. I watched. I haven't watched Revelation since my first go around when it first came out. I debated doing that again. I don't know if you rewatched it before Revolution. I saw a lot of people doing that, but I decided just to go straight into Revolution, and I felt like it was fine doing that. So yes, I've seen it all.
Yeah, I definitely did a rewatch. It's been a little while since since Revelation was out, and I wanted to make sure that going into this, everything was still fresh. I had not watched it multiple times. I just watched it the one time, and that was good. I think it was good to do that, to go in with that sort of preparation. There was a lot of epic stuff that happened in Revelation, and one of the biggest questions I came out of Revelation with was, how do you follow all that up? I mean, Orko's the character arc that Orko goes through, the character arc that He-Man goes through, that Teela goes through. There's all of these big epic things that are happening. Evil-Lyn, yeah, and
best
what
character
happens?
Arc, in my opinion.
What happens? How do you follow any of that? So just right off the bat, first impressions. Dan, I'm very anxious to hear what you have to say about this. What is just your general impression of Revolution in a bottle, and then Revolution as a continue of Revelation?
Revolution in a bottle. I loved it. It was much more enjoyable, in my opinion, than Revelation. Exciting, a lot of fun callbacks, a lot of stuff for longtime fans that were total fan service. So I had so much fun watching it. As a continuation of Revelation, I think they did a good job continuing with some of the stuff that they established. Some of that stuff isn't my favorite, but it's okay in the grand scheme of things, because I really enjoyed Revolution as a whole.
Griffin, how about you? Again, we just established it's different being on the inside, and you obviously
right. The weirder thing for me, obviously, there are personal biases I cannot put aside, but the weirder thing is that I got the scripts. I basically recorded all of my audio, I think 2 years ago now, almost 2 full years ago. So it was like they sent me all the scripts at once. I devoured them. I went in and recorded maybe later that week. I'm living that very vividly at that moment. The scripts are fresh in my mind. I'm trying to act them out. In the first season, there was a lot more pickups and sort of rewrites and things that got shifted around, really just in the first 5 episodes. But so there was more of a, I was going back in to record every couple of months and being refreshed on it. This was basically like one and done. I feel like there was maybe one line that got changed, it's usually less about rewriting and more about they'll animate the things and then they'll go like, oh, this story point isn't clear. We need one person to say this. And often it is very early. It is very easy, let me say, in later stages of animation to have Orko be the person who says that, because you don't have to reanimate his mouth.
Don't have to move the mouth.
They use that. They use that as a pretty clever gimmick. If Orko's around in a scene, he can go, "Oh my God, that's Granomir," or whatever you need to like connect details together.
Doesn't cost anything, yeah.
It costs nothing. But so true. I recorded all of it like 2 years ago, and I remembered a lot of it. But you're like remembering it from reading it and sort of the mind's eye vision of what you imagine it's going to look like. And then I really was kind of hands off from it until I guess they sent me the episodes about 3 weeks ago. I was thrilled reading the scripts. And like, you know, Dan, you are, I feel like you are one of the people, you are such an authority in MOTU. And like, I always look to you in what you sort of share and how you explain the history of the brand and all of that. You know, there's, yes, Dan Larson.
Which Stan you were talking about.
Yeah.
He's the biggest He-Man collector I know. Yeah.
Yes.
Dan Larson.
He has triples.
Yeah,
triples
my He-Man is actually right behind me, behind my chair. So you can't see it on screen right now.
No, you know, there was like a lot of obviously extreme reactions to Revelation when it came out. And you were a person, Pixel Dan, P. Danny, who I felt like explained your hesitations, your issues with the show in a way that I thought was like totally respectable. Unlike some people, where I was just like, and even you and I at PowerCon that year, I remember like talking about it in person and having like a super civil conversation about like, you know, I'm very curious, like, what do you like and what don't you like and this and that. I when I read those scripts and for Revelation, I really liked them, but I knew like there are things in this that are gonna be tricky. There are things that people are gonna have extreme reactions to, and I'm curious.
Sure.
It got bigger than I thought it would. Reading Revolution, I was like, I feel like everyone's going to like this. And it's like a dangerous thing to think. You never want to think that, you know, and especially after the reaction was so extreme. But I read it and I was like, I really feel like this is kind of the show that people were saying they wanted last time without negating the first season, without sort of undoing any of that, without feeling embarrassed of it. And as you said, there are elements that like, if you didn't like him in Revelation and they hold over to this, you're still going to struggle with them. But I do think it's much more the show that I felt a lot of people were frustrated they weren't getting from the first chunk of episodes.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. And it's tricky too, because when you're talking about something like Masters of the Universe, there is so much lore with this brand, with so many different stories that you can almost go into the de facto it's a different multiverse type of thing, right? Because we're talking about the original mini comics, which are completely different from Filmation, and Filmation is arguably the most common version that like the people that remember He-Man from when they were kids, they remember Filmation, right? Like that's what they remember about He-Man. But then you've got, you know, all the stuff that the 2000X era added and changed. You've got the stuff that the Masters of the Universe Classics bios added and changed. You've got multitudes of comic books from all these different companies. So there's all these different canons almost that all kind of have a same central idea, but like, you know, there's all this different stuff. So it's tricky when you do an animated series after all that, because I would not want to be in that position. Like all the love in the world to guys like Teddy Biaselli, because I know like he's a legitimate huge Masters of the Universe fan. I've been going to PowerCon with that man since PowerCon started, right? Way before he got the opportunity to make a show about his favorite property. And then it turned out the way it did. So, you know, it's one of those things where like, God, I would not want to be in that position. Like that could happen to any of us. That
well, and just to be clear, like I think we're very proud who worked on it. It's not like we're now trying to go that season sucked, please like this season. And there were tons of people who loved it, but it's like I'm obviously I'm aware of the world, and certainly the corners of the internet that we're discussing this show rabidly and with a lot of intensity are the corners of the internet that I've been spending time on for decades. Like it is the double-edged sword of genuinely being
weird,
a fan of this thing before getting hired onto it is like, I'm the channels I'm already going to, accounts I already following, are now swinging in with really like strong takes on things. And a lot of it was, there was like a lot of conjecture and stuff. And you were a person where I felt like when you were outlining the things that you struggled with on the show, it was very much about the show. It was like digging into the text of the show, which I have like infinite respect for anyone who dislikes anything I've worked on, but is engaging with it on that level versus a lot of the sort of narratives that started to spin out of it.
I'm so glad that you brought up like the PowerCon thing, because I was going to bring that up too, because that's such a great memory about Revelation for me. Like we went PowerCon in California, which was the last like fully He-Man centric PowerCon,
one.
by the way. It was the night before PowerCon, and it was just one of these like totally random, like happened completely organically moments where me and Christina are sitting in the bar, and then somebody will walk up and be like, "Oh, hey Dan, what did you think of Revelation?" And then like it just turned into this conversation where me and a bunch of people were sitting around and we're all talking about it, and we're, it's very differing opinions, but everybody's like talking and respecting one another, and we're having a conversation. And then Griffin walks by and sits down. And so Griffin joins us. And then 10 minutes later, Ted Biaselli walks by and he sits down and joins us. And it was just one of those cool moments where like not a lot of people get to say this, but I got to sit there with people who worked on the show and be like, hey, I respect everything you guys did. I didn't like these things. And we got to have these amazing conversations about it.
I think it's totally fair to not like something. And if you're like you just said, Griffin, if you're engaging with the context of the thing and saying this didn't feel right to me as a character point of view, I think what I can relate to as far as Revelation was concerned was this idea that you tuned into a show, you know who the main character is, it's He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and then He-Man's out of the show for like the middle third of it. And you're like, where's the guy that I'm trying to watch the show about? And there's a time and place. There's a time and place for learning about a character through the lives they have touched. What would the world be like if there was no He-Man and Skeletor? Who would be the heroes? Where would the power be? What would happen after that? And those are all very interesting questions and fascinating in the context of Masters of the Universe. I just don't think that's the story that people wanted right out of the gate,
I think, so that's kind of my thing too. And I think the problem is like people didn't realize that this was necessarily like supposed to be like an end game story or like like this is supposed to be like a story that takes place at the end of everything you know about He-Man. This is the story of what happens to Eternia when He-Man is gone. And I think that's a really, really interesting idea that has never really been explored before. But like Dan said, it's like it's apparently not what people wanted or were ready for, because I guess it had been so long since there's been a He-Man cartoon. People just wanted a He-Man cartoon. They wanted to see He-Man come in and punch Skeletor in the face and say, I have the power. And that's what they wanted. So
once you divorce yourself from that, it was actually good. I actually enjoy Revelation for what Revelation is.
and like Tila, man, like for a lot of the longtime fans who have been following this brand, this was like a storyline payoff that we've been waiting to see happen since the original since the original Filmation cartoon. Like, and if you don't know, you don't know. But the reality is Tila has always been a very focal, central character who has always been destined for this role of the sorceress since the creation of the original figure, which was going to be the sorceress before they changed her to Tila. And they set that storyline up in Filmation and never paid it off. They started setting that story up in the 2000X series and never paid it off. So I totally understand the whole concept of let's finally pay off that storyline. Let's do the sorceress thing with Tila. And it's such a shame that it like really kind of crossed at the same time as everybody being mad that He-Man was gone, and therefore blaming Tila for taking over He-Man's story when that's not exactly what was happening. But I can see why it, like in that first episode, when that moment happens, it's hard to like snap away from that, once you've already like, oh my God, they killed the guy I want to watch.
And then that narrative took over what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. The nature of the 24-hour social media and the idea that, you watching, unfortunately, as I understand it, the whole season was supposed to be dropped Revelation, where
Correct.
the whole thing was supposed to be dropped at the same time.
Yeah.
And it ended up getting broken up into 2 pieces, and
Yeah, I
that just
think that
started
was a
controversy.
mistake.
Now, if I'm a marketing person, I don't really have a big problem with that because people were talking about it. It was definitely driving viewership for good and for bad reasons. But I think the nature of 24-hour social media and people talking about it and clicks, rage bait, all this other stuff, they are hot topics that people want to jump in on and express their opinions. And this was just a very, very easy way to do it. I think if people could have just seen the whole thing as a whole instead of dissecting it as each line of dialogue came out, I think that's a different thing. It's harder to critique the whole when you're just getting little pieces of it.
Do you mind if I expound on some of this for a moment?
Please.
With my semi-insider perspective, because I'll jump around a couple things that we've now brought up. I mean, Dan, to your point about how sorry, P. Danny.
P. Danny.
About how kind of how decentralized the mythology of MOTU has been from the beginning, right? Because unlike most major properties, there's sort of an obvious core text, right? Like there's sort of people put an importance on the original Star Wars trilogy, where that is the main thing we look to, or the original runs of comic book characters, or like Star Trek, the original series, or whatever it is. There's sort of like, what's the urtext? What's the starting point? This and that. And as you're saying, it's like MOTU was fractured from the beginning, where the Filmation cartoons were doing something different than the mini comics. And even to the point you made of just like the mythology that they were developing the toys with that changed in real time, that kept evolving. And the mini comics kept evolving and everything kept on shifting. It was very much this like moving text that makes it when anything is trying to be, or let me put it this way, not when anything is trying to be, but if anything is perceived as being an attempt to tell a definitive MOTU story, it is always going to be really tricky because what is definitive in MOTU is really subjective, right?
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, and we're at a point now where with a lot of our big properties, we're used to, there's a new version of them every 2 years. They don't feel as sacrosanct. It doesn't feel as important because if you don't like this version of Ninja Turtles, there'll probably be another one in 4
literally
or 5
just
years.
Wait like an hour. Yeah.
Right. You got 3 Batman simultaneously, like whatever it is, and people will like one version more or less than the other. But as you said, people have been waiting a long time for MOTU to come back in a general sense, but even more specifically to get it back in animation was a big thing. And it had basically been, a little under 20 years off any sort of airwaves. They're not even really airwaves anymore. That's how long it had been. But
Wi-Fi still counts.
Yeah, it's a wave. It's a wave of a sort. But to your point, I hope I'm not like P. Danny saying things I shouldn't say here, but I'll speak with some candor. I think very much when Revelation was pitched, and that's happening in development the same time as the CGI reboot series, which was this big idea to reinvent it for kids and a new generation and really change the mythology. There was this notion of, can we do a series in the original continuity that is sort of, as you said, kind of an end game thing? Here's sort of the final story in the original continuity. Now, original continuity is, zooming out, a sort of mishmash of all this stuff, right? Original continuity doesn't mean, and I feel like this was sort of the thing where some people went, well, that doesn't fit in with my version of Filmation or my version of the toys or the mini comics or whatever. By the very nature of it, you're sort of mushing all that stuff together and having to pick and choose a little bit and do the things to serve the story. And I think Revelation as pitched was sort of like, they're going to let us do 10 episodes for the people who grew up with the brand before it's reinvented for a new generation. What happened was internally, as it got sort of further along at both Mattel and Netflix, I think everyone got very excited about it. And the notion of this could be a bigger thing that goes on longer and all of this happened. But there was a little bit of, in setting up the show, and all of this I say as someone who just got hired onto it a year or two after. I was not involved in this process, but I heard a lot of this from the people who worked on it. I think there was a feeling of, we're only going to get so much time to tell a sort of classic MOTU story. So we have to start at a late point, make this a continuation of everything that's come before, and make this sort of a finale to the history of MOTU. And I think that's the thing that wasn't really, that didn't really become clear until after it came out and it was received. But it's a hindsight 2020 thing where I don't think going into it up front, Netflix and Mattel would have signed off on do 2 seasons of kind of classic MOTU adventures, and then season 3 can be the wild season where everything goes sideways. There was a feeling of you kind of got to do the most extreme versions of the stories now, you know?
Sure.
And that's like a real double-edged sword. So I realized it in talking to a different friend of mine when the first season came out, and he said, I was just really enjoying the first episode and seeing all the characters back and seeing the world back and all of that. And He-Man gets stabbed and Skeletor dies and Teela throws her tiara down. And I get it. And I think it's kind of a cool story idea, but I'm sitting there and I'm going, I want 7 more episodes of what I just saw before the crazy thing happens.
I mean, that was like watching our toys come to life, right? I mean, there was so many characters in that scene who had never even been in animation before.
Yeah.
And that alone was exciting.
Yeah.
And so that was such a hype moment. And then, and then the big crazy thing happens. And it does kind of make you go, oh, like what? And
right.
I mean, that's how I felt. So
there was a slightly circumstantial thing of it needing to hit the ground running to get to the dramatic stuff quickly, because the thought was this show will not be granted the amount of episodes to blow this out. Of course, that changed. I mean, there was a feeling of we don't want to put out another thing that maybe competes with the kids show, with the CGI show. And as time went on, animation, it takes a very long time. It takes a long time to develop, a long time to animate. And over the course of years, they got into the idea of these 2 things can run concurrently. But so at that point, things are slightly set,
And that's sorry, go ahead, Griffin.
No, and I do think Revolution benefits from, it's now a sequel to the season that we made. It's not needing to reckon with the legacy of the history of the show and what you want from it, and the pressure of this is going to be the first MOTU show in 20 years in the same way. We're now sort of continuing the story that's set up there, which I just think becomes a slightly lower stakes situation, possibly, hopefully. And I also think, as you said, the Teela story is something that's been baked into the history of MOTU from the get-go and has been consistent across so many versions of the property over the years, and was overdue to finally kind of come to the forefront. Yeah. But for that to also happen in a story where Adam and Skeletor are sidelined, I think I get is frustrating for people who have just been waiting so long to see He-Man and Skeletor be back. And I think the writers this season did a really smart job of finding a story that's very much like the kind of story they were able to find for Teela and Evil Lynn last season. Here are these characters that have never gotten to be the center of the story. Who are they in the absence? What is their destiny? Who are they supposed to be? What do they struggle with internally? And now this season kind of applies the same sort of storytelling to Adam and Skeletor, And it's sort of these 2 characters, the big 2, dealing with the same kind of, who am I supposed to be?
I think from a macro sense, when you're talking about legacy brands, and I'm going to put Star Wars, Transformers, maybe G.I. Joe, we'll see where they're going with that. But Masters of the Universe, there is that challenge of how do you satisfy, you got to remember it's all products and stuff. So how can you update this for the younger audience and try to maintain, persevere with the brand into the future? But how do you take care of the people who have been experiencing this and driving it for the last 40 years? And I think the smartest move that any of these companies have done is to appeal to multiple audiences at the same time. So I watched the entire CG He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and I loved it. I watched all of Revelation and I loved it. And it's I think the more things that are out there, the easier it is for the viewer to say, like you were just saying, this isn't my version. I'll wait for the next one, or I'll stick with the one that already came out, or whatever.
Yeah. But when it's the first show in 15 years, there's obviously, it's all going to be received very differently. Last thing I want to say to this point is just, you're right that the 10 episodes of Revelation were all written as one thing, and the plan all along was for it to be digested as one season. And I think everyone knew that the sort of twists at the end of episode 1 were a big gambit that were going to sort of, that might wrinkle people a little bit. But the feeling was, well, if the whole season is there to watch in one go and they can experience the whole story in one fell swoop, They might just binge it all and get to the end of it and sort of have a perspective and be a little more at peace with some of those choices. And it truly was a pandemic thing that slowed down the workflow.
Sure.
And in a way that I think the viewers of this stream and these channels will understand. I think the real X factor was that toy production time is almost as long as animation production time, if not longer. And those Masterverse figures had a street date, and the CGI series figures had a street date.
Right.
And the CGI series was done, and it truly was this thing where it's like, we can get 5 episodes totally 100% finished and out by summer of 2021. Or we can wait 4 months, have all 10 done, and then the toys will have been on shelf a little too long, a little too early.
It's stale.
It's a bad note to start on if you're bringing the line back to shelves for too long. You know,
so a lot of moving parts.
Right. And it's like the second half of the season was not rewritten one iota. You know, at the moment the first 5 episodes dropped, the second season was 99% done. And truly the thing that actually held it up is Netflix has to translate every show into so many languages. So even when like the audio is locked and the image is locked, then there's a months-long process of subtitling it for 30 languages, dubbing it into 30 languages, and that took like an additional 4 months to come out.
Griffin, you touched a little bit on your recording process, having to do less for Revolution than for Revelation. I'm more curious about the actual technical aspects of it. As I recall, Revelation you recorded during lockdowns during COVID, and you were sitting in your closet with your microphone, right?
That was the, my audition was in my closet with my microphone, and I did an audition tape where I played every character in a scene. It's really bad and embarrassing. I mean, obviously Orko was the only one I was trying to actually get hired to do, so that was the one I had down. But there's a take of me going in between an Orko voice that's pretty well honed and a very bad Evil Lyn impression, a very bad He-Man impression, a very bad Cringer impression. But that was in my closet. It got cast at the end of 2019, and then did record the bulk of my stuff in January, February. I will release that audition on social media. I did. I located the file again recently, and I would put it out on my. On
you gotta have somebody. You gotta have somebody flash animate something over it, or squiggle animation or something.
Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, and I didn't know who else they were going to cast any of the parts. So I'm just doing like full filmation impressions of every character, but the bulk of the recording was done January, February 2020. So I actually got the majority of it in before lockdown. And then things were on ice for a while. And thankfully, by the time they needed me to come back in and rewrite some lines, that was maybe fall 2020. And there were protocols in place so I could actually go to a studio. There were other cartoon shows I was working at the time that I did have to record in my closet or underneath my bed sheets, which does not make you feel very professional. It's hard to feel like you're doing a real job when like one hand is busy holding up a comforter and you're like in a pillow fort that you built for sound security. But yeah, no, it was. I thankfully got to do all of it in real studios, but you don't do any of it with the other actors.
That was my understanding as well. It wasn't an ensemble recording.
Yeah, that was
either time. Yeah.
No, that wasn't a pandemic thing. There are very, very few projects that record actors together in any way, because even if it is nice for the actors and for performance, it tends to make editing and animation a lot harder.
Sure.
So I know like Simpsons would record together for a bit, and Bob's Burgers maybe still does. It's usually more comedy shows where they want to get like timing and overlapping dialogue and things like that. There was one session they did for Revelation where Lena Headey and Mark Hamill got to record together. And I think that was truly kind of like a happy accident where they realized they had them scheduled right next to each other and they could overlap it and have them do a couple of their scenes together. But otherwise, it was always going to be separated. Yeah.
Dan, I don't know if you were following this. I wasn't aware of who was in this cast until I watched it. Like I know William Shatner had been announced. We didn't know who he was playing, but I didn't know Meg Foster was in it. I didn't know. I didn't know we got a new. I didn't know. We got a new Marlena.
Gates McFadden.
There you
Gates
go.
McFadden.
There you go.
Yeah, Crusher.
Didn't know
Dr.
that.
Crusher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I didn't know Gwildor. I didn't know his voice actor, Ted Biaselli, till I saw the credits, and I was like, Ted Biaselli. Where do I know that name from? Oh, I saw it at the beginning of the show. He's a producer.
Yeah. I knew.
Do you know?
I knew about.
Was there? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say. So, like, I went to the panel at Comic-Con this year, where they actually showed us that entire Scareglow opening scene. So that was pretty cool that we got to see that ahead of time.
It was an incredible scene.
Such a cool way to open the show. But they told us then that there was like Melissa Benoist was cast as Tila this time around, and I think it was like a scheduling thing with Sarah Michelle Gellar, but I think Melissa Benoist did a great job. It was awesome. She did wonderful. That obviously we found out about Shatner at the panel I was at when they surprised us by bringing Shatner out, but they never told us who he was. And that we didn't find out until the show aired, because when I started seeing Granomir on the posters, I was like, that's definitely Shatner. Shatner's going to be Granomir.
Right.
Like, that's the perfect thing for Shatner to do. So I was shocked when we got to see who he actually was. I did not see that coming at all. And they did a good job keeping that secret, I think, until the show aired. Until 3 weeks early. I was gonna say until literally a stupid toy spoiled the surprise.
I know.
Online for anybody.
Skelegod, I will put all blame on Mattel. Like, they should have held that figure back to not ruin that for the first season. But Keldor, they really tried to keep a lid on it, and it's frustrating that it was secure for so long, and then at the last moment,
right? Amazon put up a listing for it. It was like, no, that's
yeah. But it was that part of it was fun. Of like, they announced that Hordak was going to be in it. People assumed that Shatner was playing Hordak. Then they say Keith David's playing Hordak. Granomir's on the poster. People assume Shatner's playing Granomir. They put the Gwildor figure in the case at SDCC. People assume Shatner's playing Gwildor. The amount of people who were so confident that Shatner was Gwildor was really...
Hey, you know what? Funny. Obviously, he's been acting for a long time, but this was a different thing, and I thought he did fantastic. Like, I thought what he brought to the character was very interesting. We've seen Keldor before. I'm sorry to everybody that hasn't watched it yet, but we're going to get into some spoilery.
I guess it's spoiler time
stuff
here.
I
should make sure people know we're about to spoil
and it was fascinating just from a pop culture sci-fi nerd perspective to see Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, and William Shatner, Captain Kirk, going after each other.
That was the big kind of, I think, conceptual idea there. Like, I remember when the season got picked up, and I was talking to Kevin Smith about what the plans were, and he said we have Shatner's going to play the new big bad in the next season. And I went, oh, Hordak. Like, I made the same assumption that I think everyone made.
That's the same thing I did. Yeah.
Right. And he went, no, Keldor. And when he said that to me, I went, I don't even understand what that means. Like, how would you? You're gonna have someone different play Keldor than Skeletor, and is he only in flashbacks? How is he the villain? And he was like, I think you'll get it when you see it. And to watch it, I like that. There are a couple times in the arc of the way the story plays out where I was like, are they screwing this up? When I'm reading the scripts and you realize we're getting into deep spoiler territory here, but that the Keldor you're seeing at first is like a projection of Motherboard. And you're like, oh, so Keldor's not real. That's kind of a bummer. And it's like, no, the whole point is like these two personalities in this guy's head, which then allows you to have Luke Skywalker and Captain Kirk act against each other for the first time.
There's a great Star Trek crew in here also. I mean, John Delancey's in here, and Rusher's in here,
how cool is it to have Q as Granomir? That is like such a perfect.
He was really, really
casting
fantastic
too.
Really fantastic. My interest in Masters of the Universe is more strictly from the toys. Having the vintage toys as a kid, obviously I had the mini comics, I was aware of them. It didn't bother me that they didn't match, because even G.I. Joe and Transformers, they didn't match. The comics never matched the shows, so it didn't really matter to me. It's like you said at the beginning, it's a fractured thing to begin with, and you just pick the version you like, or throw it all out. Who cares? Starscream was in Castle Grayskull when I was playing. It doesn't matter, So it was very, but so as far as Granomir is concerned, I have no connection to Granomir. I don't know who's voiced him in the past. I don't know what personality he has, if he has one. So it was very interesting to be introduced, as far as I'm concerned, to that character for the first time.
Wasn't John Irwin also Granomir? I
I
think.
think that is right.
No
I think
idea.
yeah.
No idea.
So so Granomir is one of those interesting characters who appeared in the mini comics, but also had a role in the Filmation cartoon. And he's one of those like iconic Filmation type characters, right? I definitely will like. It was great seeing him in this. I missed kind of like the big pot belly design of the original one. This one had much more of like a regular dragon body. I did love things like I loved how I recognized what was about to happen the moment that scene came on, because as soon as they walked in and I saw that pit and I saw Granomir's helmet laying on the other side, I recognized it and instantly got excited. I was like, oh crap, this is Granomir. This is awesome.
So you didn't know from the poster that was Granomir?
Well, so like I did see the poster, but I didn't see the poster until like right before.
Okay.
So I watched the screener. You know, I got to watch it a little early. So it was one of those things where like it wasn't quite like I hadn't made that connection yet. So when that scene came on, I was really excited. And the helmet was laying in the background. He wasn't wearing it, but it was laying there and it looked like the Filmation Granomir helmet. So that was really cool. But yeah, he's much more dragon-like in this, and seems to be a bit more of a jerk. like he's always been a little kind of puzzle type guy. Like he's one of those like you got to learn your destiny type of characters. That's like a guide type character, but he was definitely angrier in this one, I would say.
The Silver K here, very smog-like. Yes.
Yeah.
P. Danny, I'm curious because like Keldor is one of those elements that's a little bit like tricky within the mythos of MOTU, where a lot of it's filled in between the gaps, and certain people read it one way or another way, and Skeletor's origin in general never totally fits together. You kind of have to
fits together.
Which version of it is the one that's your headcanon?
Right. So, and if you don't know, if you've not really been following, obviously the original Filmation cartoon didn't really touch on Skeletor's origin, but they didn't usually go that deep with a lot. Like when they went deep on stories, it was always special. Skeletor was not one that they really ever. He was just the bad guy who showed up and tried to take Castle Grayskull every episode. But in the original mini comics, you know, like in those first few issues where the story was very different, where it was very barbarian swords and sorcery based, he was like a demon from another dimension, basically, who came to Eternia. And then later in the mini comics, they started setting up this story of Randor looking for his long lost brother Keldor. And they were trying to figure, and there was like the search for Keldor was like going to be this storyline, and it never happened. It never finished because the toy line ended. And so that was a big discussion on the forums for many, many, many years before the 2002 series really came in. Because I think it was pretty known just via interviews and talking to people that it was going to be Skeletor. Like Keldor was going to turn out to be Skeletor. And so, but it was never
it's in the name.
Right. It was just never officially put in the books. Right. So like, we knew that that's the direction it was headed, but because it never officially happened, there was still always that, well, maybe not, you know, maybe that wasn't. But then when the Mike Young Productions cartoon came out in 2002, that was like the main focal point. Like that show opened with Skeletor's origin. Yeah. And since then, that's basically just been like, that's the origin for Skeletor now. Like that's kind of become the mainstay for him.
And even including the CG He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, that's a key relationship now in the mythology.
Did it sort of, I asked you with I'm curious for your honest response, but like, how did you feel about the way the sort of Skeletor origin is unpacked in Revolution?
I got scared at first.
Same. I had the same
when
feeling reading
Keldor
it.
showed up, that
Hey,
whole
look,
scene,
the fright zone was there, and that was awesome.
that
Yeah,
was
that's
awesome.
scary. That's also scary.
But when Keldor first showed up, and obviously it later turns out that it's the motherboard projection or whatever. But when Keldor first walks up, and he's like, I'm your uncle, your long lost uncle, or whatever. Like, I immediately was just like, oh God, the internet's gonna be so mad. I don't want to have to. I don't want to. Oh
Turn off
no!
notifications. Yeah,
Like that was what I was worried about.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, that's just one of those things where, like, you just wait till the next episode,
Right.
and all of a sudden it comes around and you see where it's going. And the idea that Skeletor didn't remember his own origin was really interesting, in the sense that hasn't technically happened, except if you're thinking about those vintage mini comics, maybe.
Right.
The whole search for Keldor thing, because he never once alluded to the fact that he might have been related to the royal family or anything like that. And it's very possible that, like, this is almost like their way of paying homage to that whole search for Keldor storyline that never played out in the original mini comics. So I thought that was really interesting to see that done here. Also, it's like, it really does kind of establish that, like, even though Revelation and Revolution is sort of like this kind of like later in the canon storyline, this really does set it apart as its own canon too, right?
Yeah.
Because now we know that there wasn't this whole like storyline with Keldor and Randor before, with Randor and Keldor going to battle and the acid spilling on his face and accidentally burning him. And Hordak, like in that one, it was like he singed his face with acid, and then Hordak used magic to keep him alive, and that's why he has a skull face.
Yeah.
So like you almost kind of had little bits of that, but it was different. We've got a different sort of take on that whole thing here. And I liked it. I thought it still worked fine because all of the important elements were still there. We still got to see the Hordak connection, which is so important for Skeletor's backstory.
Yeah.
And I was so happy to see that whole thing. You know what I mean? Where he was basically like adding in the whole Anwat Gar stuff was really cool.
Yeah.
Because the only part of Anwat Gar we really got to see in the 2002 series was Cyclone, was like the last member of the Gar protecting this island. But we knew that Keldor was a Gar. So he obviously his birth mother is from that island, right? So that was kind of interesting seeing that whole aspect of it, because we never really got to see that before. But yeah, all the Hordak stuff was great. And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into more Hordak stuff later, but there's some Hordak moments that made me like scream. I was like, happy scream.
From a writing perspective, just from a dialogue perspective, I actually was very entertained by all the one-liners, like, Skeletor saying to Prince Adam, say uncle, and then he comes back with, I like my uncles once removed. I was like, all right, that's actually, that's funny.
That's good stuff.
That's a good line.
And it's very He-Man too, those one-liners.
Yeah. I feel like if you weren't putting dad jokes in there, you'd be getting too far away from the spirit of like Filmation, which had a lot of punny jokes.
Yes.
Well, and that's He-Man.
Yes, dude, it is. Yes.
That's not necessarily Prince Adam, but that's He-Man.
Right.
Skeletor called somebody a boob in this one, and I got so excited.
Yeah,
I was like, he said boob.
He used boob more than once.
Yeah, I was so happy.
Yeah, for sure. We'll come back to that for a second. This, I think, to say 79 here makes a good point. My only problem with season 2 is something you see everywhere these days. Let characters die. When they're killed on screen, somehow they always get reanimated. I do think there's a stakes issue when you bring characters back too much. You keep reanimating. It's bringing them back from the dead. And so each time something happens, you're like, okay, well, this character's never actually going to die. They're never actually going to go away. Yeah. And you do rob it of some of that power. People were upset in Revelation because He-Man was dead. And now it's like, oh, well, if he gets killed again, they'll just bring him back again. It's not a big deal. And so now you sort of take that drama away from the potential narratives in the future.
Well, I will say they still left a lot of those other characters dead. And if there's one thing that I will complain about with Revelation is that there were too many characters dying. I was
wondering.
quite
I hadn't kept a scorecard as to who refreshed the roster more, the 80s Transformers movie or this.
yeah. Like the way Moss Man died, I was upset about, and obviously Fisto and Clamp Champ kind of didn't really get a chance to do anything but die, and they stayed dead. Like we got to see their spirits. Oh yeah, Stondar in this one. I got so excited to see Stondar, and I was like, well, first time on an animated series ever, and he lasted 10 seconds.
How cool is the Stondar transformation though? Like that's one of those things that I read in paper, and I just assumed from reading the script, look like the cartoon. He'll just fold down. He'll be like the toy. And I just thought that was such a cool, right? No, his body's transforming into rocks.
Yeah, that's actually Kate had a good question. She's asked, have we seen Mosquitor at all?
No,
not yet.
If there's one thing that's needed was more Mosquito. The Horde was there. Where was Mosquitor? I mean,
but can I play devil's advocate? The longer he's not in the series, the more you still have the chance to voice him eventually.
That's true. That's true. Right. And the more important he becomes, because when you're running out of villains, like you take Skeletor out, take Hordak out, it's like, who are you left with? We've already run through a lot of the villains.
Yeah.
Evil Lynn's off the table, Beastman's off the table. It's like, well, who's left? Mosquitor.
The closest we've gotten to Mosquitor in animation was Mosquitara.
The
CGI version. Yeah. Eventually we'll get Mosquito. Hopefully
we'll get there. Yeah.
Can we talk about just with costumes, not necessarily the roles in the shows themselves? Let's talk about costumes and the potential for all these other action figures that could be coming down the road. I was very intrigued, and I appreciate it. Call it fan service, call it whatever you want. But this idea that this, especially Revolution, leaned into the different multiverses of, the different interpretations of Masters of the Universe. Bringing in Gwildor was a big, indicator that this was not going to be, traditional sort of Masters of the Universe thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, that He-Man's gold armor there in his final look, that symbol that's only been in the CG show, right?
Yes, I pointed that out immediately. Like I pointed it out to my son. I was like, he's wearing the symbol from your He-Man, because Spencer, my son, loves the CG He-Man. He watches it constantly, which is awesome. But I noticed it right away. I thought that was really interesting that they did that.
Yeah, and I felt like that whole look was sort of a bit of a Dolph Lundgren kind of homage 100%. In that respect. Yeah,
and Skeletor was Disco Skeletor, right?
Yeah.
Skeletor feels very Disco Skeletor inspired. I don't know if they have like an internal name for those final looks settled. But I also feel like that final look, He-Man shares a lot with Hero as well, which I really like.
With the gold, yeah. Gold and the red,
yeah.
No, it's a pretty long list right now of different looks and styles of characters that could potentially be coming down the road.
Hey, if there's one thing they did, it was very toyetic. This was a toy like every scene was like, here's a new action figure, here's a new action figure.
And not only that, like new play sets and vehicles. Like once you see the teched out Castle Grayskull, I'm like, what can they make that?
I know. As soon as I saw it, I was like, I need Castle Horde Skull.
So let's talk about Castle Grayskull for a second here. Revelation really took out of the idea that there were secrets hidden there anymore, right? Like after Revelation, everybody's like, we get it. It's the central matrix of magic throughout everything in existence. You don't need to keep the skull face on anymore. You're not hiding anything anymore. But I appreciate that they still have the skull face look on the outside. It's like somebody's keeping up their Halloween decorations all year because they just like the vibe of it.
Yeah, good vibes. Good vibes.
Like it could still be a shining gold castle with, magic flowing everywhere. But they're like, no, keep the skull up. It looks cool. And then Hordak comes in. What do you like? Do you like Hordak skull, Castle Grayskull? The big bat wings? Is that?
I liked it. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I think it's a cool design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
like I said, as soon as I saw it, I was like, play set, let's go. I need it.
I
don't have room for it, but I want it.
I forget what the name is they have for it, but there's like the fleet ship that they have early that Andra's on, where Randor has his battle armor. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The like owl ship or whatever it is.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
it's sort of
We'll
like
find out.
there's some Powerhouse has some internal name for it, but I think that's like a toy probably too large to produce that I would want. Yeah.
Hey, it could show up
Monster
as a
Energy right there.
Mattel Creations project.
Possibly, yeah. I know Mattel.
Cloud Crusher is what the comments are
Cloud
saying.
Crusher, yes.
Okay.
I
didn't actually know that. I didn't know that.
I know some of the folks at Mattel were complaining that Granomir was made too big on the cartoon, so that it would make it incredibly.
Because they wanted to make a toy. We've already got one giant Granomir.
I know.
They did it in classics.
Yeah.
2 of them. They did red and green.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was a little disappointed that the and I don't recall if we saw this in Revelation, that the, I'm going to call it Hulkbuster armor that Randor has, Andra made, and Prince Adam wears it. I was a little disappointed that it didn't look like the suit of armor from Castle Grayskull, the original cardboard. I really felt like I really feel like that was a missed opportunity. Yeah,
about that.
The little space suit
that's
armor.
A good thought.
Because the shapes are all right there. It's basically that suit. And I was like, why did they recolor it? Maybe somebody will paint it for season 3.
Yeah.
If there is
that's like the number one toy I want watching the show. Even now that I'm aware of the missed opportunity that you pointed out, that's my like favorite new design this season. And and the amount of different characters who wear it, I was just thinking about the interchangeability of like,
that's cool. Yeah.
Right. We'll just give the head and shoulders and you can pop them all in.
Yeah, it's somebody else. Yeah, I called it Hulkbuster notes. Hulkbuster in my notes as well.
Yeah.
It's so the thing that I really left with my rewatch of Revelation was how epic the whole thing was, and how if you had read about the things that happened in Revelation on a card back or in narration that somebody was doing in a mini comic, you'd be saying, "Oh God, I wish we could see that. I wish we could watch that." Eva Lynn got the power. She was the master of the universe. Skeletor had it. Eva Lynn had it. She destroyed Preternia. Like these things were so epic. Like, I don't know to what extent that mythology has actually been told about the powers of Grayskull era. The Snake Men invasion and, Hero and all of that stuff, Bionatops and those sorts of characters. But that's what that felt like to me, is that like this was a story we would have heard about in the long dead past of this, that sets up the events that are happening in the present. But this was happening in the present. And, my one sentence review of this entire thing of Revelation and Revolution is, I'm so happy that this is a franchise that has decided to move the story forward. Like, we're not obsessing on prequel stuff and telling all these stories that happened in the past. Like, I want to go forward. I love Star Wars. And as someone who grew up with the original trilogy, there are things I didn't like about the prequels. I loved Watto, but there are things I didn't love about the prequels because I just wanted to go forward. I wanted to know what happened next.
Sure.
And so I'm elated that Masters of the Universe is in a position that, especially now, even with, sort of post-credits teasers and stuff, we don't really know where it's going. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah, and even like there's a lot of stuff in it that exists previously in the MOTU lore, but
some of it is a retelling, yes.
But also some of it's never been in animation. There's a lot of stuff like story beats where it's like, well, if you've been following this loyally, there are things that were in the DC Comics run from about 10 years ago, or established in the classics bio. I mean, if we can go like full spoiler here, the Dispara thing at the end, the very, very end, they withheld that from our scripts when we were recording. I actually don't know if they held it from every actor or just me, because they knew I would know what that meant and didn't want me to leak it. But I didn't know until I watched the episode.
Griffin's not going to be able to keep this quiet.
Right. And that was like a thing that blew my mind. I did not think that was something that would ever get kind of worked into a mainline narrative, because Dispara had always kind of existed as this like what if idea.
Dan, do we know, is there any, because the Masterverse line has put out She-Ra figures. They put out She-Ra, they put out Catra. There's no issues with She-Ra, right? As far as we know.
Okay, so I don't know everything, but I know there's tricks there. The way I understand it, Universal, DreamWorks, whatever, they fully own She-Ra. Mattel still has rights to do toys of those characters and has not lost rights to do those characters, but they own She-Ra. And that's because He-Man and She-Ra were like created, like they're together, but they were created separately. And I think Filmation retained ownership over She-Ra, and then that sold and sold and sold and sold. And so it ended up with Universal now. So Mattel still has He-Man as an IP, but I don't think they technically have She-Ra as an IP. So that's the weirdness. And so like even watching this, I feel like there were some little tricks there that they were doing just to like make sure, because obviously we just
hurting you are Griffin, are we? You don't know anything that you're trying to keep secret.
I was gonna say I don't want to like speak like out of line or anything like that.
I'm listening with great attention to everything you're saying.
I was gonna say like I feel like that's the perfect reason why they would just use Despara instead of just straight showing us Force Captain Adora. You know what I mean? Like if you hadn't been following, Despara was kind of created in recent comic books that were like a retelling of the Secret of the Sword storyline, where Force Captain Adora was Despara, was this like much more ruthless version of a Force Captain Adora before she got the She-Ra, remembered who she was, got the She-Ra powers. So I thought man, and I know we're jumping way, way ahead now, but
sure,
like that was like the post-credit scene, and I fell off the couch. Like I was so happy, because I was like, and I don't know, like, hopefully this is something that they are able to make happen, or like this, like I hope there's a good reason they're teasing us with it, because I just got so happy knowing that Adora is there, that she's out there, that she exists. It's funny. You know what I mean? We haven't erased that from history. Like it's like she's there, and I'm so happy.
Every time there was a line of dialogue where like Randor, or Queen Marlena, anytime they would be like, I want to talk to my family, like just family, and my only son, and you're my only child, and blah blah blah, I would interject to myself in my living room, but your other daughter too, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Well, it makes you wonder.
We're keeping a lot of secrets. I guess we're still keeping that one.
well, or there could totally be some sort of like mind wipe thing going on, right?
And wasn't that part of the original story?
Yes, that was part of the original story, I believe, even in Filmation, because they didn't really ever.
She didn't exist yet. Well, she didn't. Yes,
exactly.
Yet,
she wasn't created.
So the original animated series ends. They got to introduce She-Ra, and so they come up with this story that everybody got mind wiped, and they didn't know about her, and so that whole thing. But I think the minute you introduce Hordak into something, you introduce the possibility of
She-Ra. You have to. Well, yeah. As soon as Hordak is there, it's in the back of all of our minds. Like, where's Adora? Where's Adora? Where's She-Ra?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, we even got the scene in the middle, which made me so happy. When we were getting Keldor's backstory as he was remembering stuff, they straight up showed the baby stealing scene right out of Secret of the Sword. And like I said, like you didn't see him holding a baby, but the way Hordak's body was turned, he was cradling, and if I had to go back and relook, but in the nursery, there are 2 cribs, and one of them is turned over, and there's a stuffed unicorn that had fallen out of that crib.
Oh, interesting.
I was ecstatic, dude. I was like, yeah. And it's just one of those things where, like, as a longtime fan, I'm happy to know she's out there. I'm happy to know that this is part of it.
And hey, look, all the rights issues, who owns what, whatever, all it takes is a piece of paper with somebody's signature on it to say, yeah, go ahead and use it. Make us some toys, make us a bunch of money. Like this stuff.
Yes, make us money.
I will just say as simply as I can that the contract right stuff is so above my pay grade as a lowly voice actor. And I followed it from a distance the same way you guys have, of trying to figure out like, and I think your accounting of it is, by my understanding, pretty on point about what the whole situation is there, P. Danny. But definitely those details in Revolution were not wantonly inserted.
Of course, nobody accidentally animated something.
And it wasn't meant to just be a sort of like Easter egg thing. I think there's a lot of story intentionality there.
Well,
and there's a very clear No, what were you gonna say? Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, like, earlier Dan was saying, where do you go from here? That's the perfect place we go from here, right? That's it.
I was going to say
that hasn't been told yet.
There is a clear, specific intent for what the third season would be. It has been basically outlined and figured out, and it certainly would build off of things that happen at various points of this season in that way. But there are a lot of contingencies there in terms of the season being well received and successful enough for Netflix that they want another one to happen, and then maybe a couple contracts needing to be signed. But there is a roadmap
that's what I want to make sure
the
audience understands, is that you guys want to make it just as much as we want to see it. And one of the best things, one of the most helpful things you can do is when you go into Netflix and you hover over the thumbnail for the thing, or you go in to look at the actual series, there's 3 buttons there. Not for me, liked it, loved it. Hit that love button. Go in and hit that love button and make sure you're sending that information to Netflix that you want to see more of this and you want to see where this story is going.
I'd also say, if you liked the season and you're on social media and you're looking for what are the positive things I should say about it if I'm trying to encourage Netflix to make more, maybe call out some of those elements that felt a little teased in this season that you would like to see come to fruition.
Yeah.
In the next one, maybe the positive encouragement there couldn't hurt if there's a kind of proof that there's a desire for that.
Technical question. Griffin, you probably don't know this, but to me, it seemed like there was potentially 2 animation studios on this, because it seemed like when we went into real strong He-Man action, Skeletor versus He-Man, like that animation to me felt a little different, a little amped up, just in terms of the presentation. I felt like some of the characters, their movements really started to stretch and bend in ways that they hadn't previously. That's not a complaint. That's not a negative criticism. It just almost seemed like we were looking at it through a different lens, which was great. It really amped up the action. But I'm not sure if that was an issue of 2 different animation studios or just a director's choice.
I'm pretty certain it was 100% Powerhouse, who are the main animation studio across all of these episodes. And they kind of think of themselves as like an American anime style studio. They're really trying to do an American interpretation of sort of the sort of principles of Japanese animation. And a lot of that is, if you watch so much anime, the dialogue scenes tend to be animated very differently than the action scenes,
Sure,
and a lot of that comes back to Japanese animation always traditionally had a much smaller budget to work with than American animation. We were getting Disney cartoons where everything was super fluid and flowery and what
really high frame rate. Yep.
Yeah. And in Japan, when Japanese animation starts up in the 50s and 60s and 70s and all of that, there were more limited resources, and so it was sort of like, how do you simplify the dialogue scenes to put the maximum resources into the action and make the action really expressive and really push almost into sort of extreme stylization? So I think what you're noticing is a very deliberate choice to sort of honor that kind of style.
Well, and I felt like from an anime perspective, this Revolution, even more so than Revelation, really leaned into the sort of magical guy, magical girl, the final transformations for He-Man and Teela that went full on magical girl transformation.
Yes. Very Sailor Moon.
Down to their bare anatomy, little pieces flying on, the hair flowing back. I loved it. And I loved that they really also, because one of the mistakes that the original Masters of the Universe made, both the show and the toy line, was assuming that there were different audiences for this thing, instead of just treating everybody as one big audience who was in love with these characters and this concept and this mythology. To this day, I'm still boggled by the choice to make She-Ra toys. The marketing of the day was, you got to make these 4 girls, so they have to be a different size, and they have to have hair play, and they have to have clothing play, and all of this other stuff. And it's like, I never understood then, and I still don't today. You had Teela. You had this Teela and Evelyn body.
Yeah.
Why wasn't the heroine? Why wasn't She-Ra the same size, the same body, the same sort of?
And also, I mean, to your point, they're also releasing the Horde villains, the She-Ra villains, in the Masters line in a different style.
Exactly.
Like there was this feeling of, well, the boys want to collect the bad guys from the girl show, so we can make those in the pre-established style, but the heroes have to be, I know.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
on point.
So I really
Yeah.
appreciated that that Revolution, especially to me, felt like it was really leaning into some of the romance stuff. You know, this whether you like the Prince Adam, Tila, He-Man, Tila stuff, which that's a whole weird thing we can get into as well. Is like, you know, who are you in love with here? Are you in love with Prince Adam? You in love with He-Man? And you know, it's weird to me now because Revelation sets up this idea that Prince Adam doesn't need the sword, to become He-Man, and B can hold on to it as long as he wants to until he relinquishes that power back. And so it's interesting to me now when he chooses to hold on to it, like that final speech at the end, he delivers as He-Man instead of as Prince Adam. And it's like, wait, shouldn't you be Prince Adam doing this? And all the sort of, you know, romance stuff with Tila, it's all He-Man. It's like, all right, well, how long are you going to hold on to the power so you can be in this relationship with Tila? You know, it's weird. And then from the animation perspective, just all the flowing hair and the glistening bodies and stuff, I was like, this is great. I'm loving it. This is a new kind of He-Man and I'm all for it.
Yeah, what a thing I love is in the final form, Disco Skeletor, the sort of like raging galaxy they have inside his chest is such a cool thing that you can kind of only do in animation. I challenged the Mattel design team to figure out how to depict that in plastic, but it looks very cool.
Translucent with glitter is probably
that's it. That's it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. That's it. That's it.
I don't know. I would say, just jumping on the Tila He-Man stuff, I was very happy with that part of it, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. I guess I'm always a bit of a romantic when it comes to stuff like that, but we've been talking about stuff that we haven't seen that has always been teased for a long time. And He-Man and Tila is one of those things. Yeah. So like when they kissed, I got a little teary-eyed, I'll be honest. Like it's one of those things that I was like, finally we got these two together. After all this,
and you can advance to the next stage, the next chapter of this relationship. Now, what does that mean when you have these two gods essentially, you know, in a relationship together, and where does that go, and what happens with that, and how does that change the dynamic of Eternia and all of those things? Griffin, I did want to ask you one other very important question while we still had you here. Where are you at with your Orko collection? You missing anything? Do you have everything?
I mean, I got my new guy right here.
Nice.
My immediate #1 action figure of 2024.
No, I mean the accessory for Gwildor. Yeah,
the accessory for Gwildor. Yeah.
Excuse me. I have my Gwildor down here in a Target bag. No, I respect him. It's a good guy. It's a gentleman's figure. Yeah.
I loved Gwildor in the show. I loved the banter between Gwildor and Orko. Because of the fact, I mean, like, we all know exactly what that was, right? Like, in the original movie, Gwildor was the Orko of that movie. So having those two characters on screen at the same time and going at each other was hilarious.
That was, I mean, it was the most fun for me to play because it's it's the scenes I never thought would ever happen. I just hadn't even considered the possibility that they would place Orko and Gwildor in the same space rather than treat them as kind of alternate versions of each other. And then the choice of, oh no, of course they hate each other makes so much
of course.
And sort of
they went on an adventure without Orko. How dare they?
Well, exactly. That's my like eternal canon as an actor, right? Is like, you know, I mean, we all know it's like Gwildor is in that movie and Orko is not because they thought Orko was too expensive and too complicated for special effects.
Exactly.
So they make this sort of alternative version of the character who is more makeup heavy and walks on the ground and all of that.
Right.
And so they were always sort of viewed as like Pepsi and Coke of one another rather than being sort of parallel to each other as like things in the same, you know, product line or whatever, for lack of a better term. And my internal headcanon is like, he hates Gwildor because he's, for the last 35 years, heard his friends ad infinitum talk about this great adventure they went on. On Earth.
So what? I've been to Earth too. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, it's not like they replaced him on the lineup with with Stratos or something. It's like, no, you took the guy who's exactly like me.
Orko went to Earth and hung out with those kids at Christmas time once.
That's right.
So
That's right.
That's true. That's a good call.
Yeah, he's been there. He's been there. He's
bragging about it to them, but they're not as impressed.
Griffin, I assume you're getting that Mondo.
I am.
Oh, that
I
Orko
am.
looks so good, right?
My question is only because look, it's a reasonable price. You know, it's reasonably up there
It's
in cost.
expensive. It
It
comes
is.
with a lot, though. It's got
That
3 figures in it.
that's my thing, and I'm like
Yeah,
the amount of different looks for Orko with the multiple heads, and especially it being the first version to have the sort of unmasked Trollan head and
which is
the
creepy.
leg. It's creepy. It's creepy.
I'll never display that look. I'm sorry. That's just like,
My question is, I'm like, I might need to get 2 so that I can have that look on display, but I don't want that to be the only look I have on display. So I'm definitely in for one. I'm on the fence about the second one. No, I like, I as I said, it got the part shortly before the pandemic, and I think, as was the case with a lot of people during lockdown, my collecting just got out of control in all areas. Just too much time available to scan eBay for all sorts of different things I like.
all of us. All of
But
us.
right. I think it's relatable to anyone probably watching this stream. But because I had just gotten this part and had just started working on it and everything, it was like, well, great. My project for the lockdown is to get every Orko I can possibly get, right? Like, I've had a good MOTU collection for a while. I have like the majority of 2000X and classics. And I had my like Orko figures, but I was like, now I need to get Orko in every form factor possible. And part of that is, and I know you, P. Danny, have like, talk about the fun of the MOTU merch as much as we love the toys, all the weird stuff that got produced when there was this like 6-year seemingly like licensing spree in every country.
Yes.
Part of the fun is just trying to track down like, wait, did they make this or not? So I'll like identify like, oh, there's a German chapstick, and they made 4 of the characters. Did they make an Orko one or not? And then
You
I'm
find
lost
new stuff of that all the time. Like new things for the merchandise pop up all the time. It's insane.
The 2 that are still kind of like my white whales, there's the Nightlight that I think was an American product. Are you familiar with like the figural Nightlights?
Yeah. I don't know that I couldn't tell you if there's an Orko one.
There is an Orko one, and it never, ever goes on sale. It feels like there are very few of them, and I don't need it to be in package. I would be happy to find a loose one, but I've just been scanning the internet like a hawk for 4 years, waiting for anyone to sell theirs, and it never seems to happen. And then there's that. Are you familiar with like the plush prototype from the 80s? There's the photo that was always on He-Man.org.
Yes, I know that photo, but that's really all I know of it. Yeah.
And then in the last couple of years, a few people have stepped forward who had them, because there was this question of, was this ever actually produced? And it's basically come out that like 4 or 5 maximum production quality prototypes were made before this company decided. This is, you know what? That is probably why there are so few of them out there. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
Oh man.
It's come out that there are like 4 or 5 maybe tops in private collections.
Oh,
and
of course.
One guy put his up for sale over Instagram, not even on eBay or anything, but like there's an account sprouted up. He posted a picture of it. He said, who would want to buy this? I messaged him and said, how much are you asking for it? And then the next thing I knew, someone else had
bought it. Yeah.
But I don't know who. And then you can't track down how to like, I would buy that off of whoever.
Most
that
of that
is,
stuff disappears into private collections and we never see it again. And we never, it's crazy. Yeah.
And those, I mean, any of those people who have the Orko items I still need, they have me bent over a barrel. They have me, they could name their price. At this point, I'm in too deep. There's, there's the 3D kind of like wall relief. I forget what they call them. But there's the line
They're
of
like 3D wall mounts, the art.
Exactly.
Wall.
Yeah. So I have that, but there was at one point last year, someone put up on eBay the original wood carving that they made the mold off of. And it was going for less than those wall mounts usually go for, because they go for a lot. The Orko one seems to be the rarest. And the prices have just kept on creeping up. And I was just like, how is that? This is truly one of a kind. This is going for a reasonable price. No one is bidding against me on it. I have this locked down, and like 2 minutes before the auction closed, someone else jumped in, beat me to it, and now I don't know who that person is. And I would like, if I had their email, I would email them and say, "You got me 5 times whatever you paid.
Yeah,
you have it
5 times whatever you paid."
Because now I know it exists. It's going to drive me crazy for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And there's only one of those.
There's one. I know there's only one.
A couple people pointing out and asking in chat. Lou Scheimer was the original voice of Orko.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's I have a there's so many.
Nice.
There's so many old MOTU and She-Ra cells out there. Like it's very easy to collect those. Maybe my prized possession in my Orko collection, I was able at one point for a weirdly low price to track down an Orko cell that was signed by Lou Scheimer, which just meant a lot to me because it's like, this is the guy who created this character, voiced this character, created the animated show, and it's all kind of in one nice little frame piece I have now.
I have a cell of Orko and Cowl dancing from the Christmas special. Yeah, it's really nice. I like it.
Oh, there's your seller in chat.
There you go. Somebody, there's one.
Well,
I'll give you 5 times what you paid for it. I got your back, Griffin.
Exactly.
I encourage you to slide into my DMs and we can negotiate. If you're willing to talk, there's a conversation to be had.
A very powerful and influential person who knows people.
Do you still have like white whales in your collection, P. Danny?
Yes.
MOTU specific. Yeah,
MOTU specific. So a lot of the stuff that I would really like to get at this point is a lot of the international variants that are out there. And like, it's stuff that like a lot of people also want. So that's what makes them like, they're expensive. And it's not that they're hard to get. It's just going to be a matter of me finding one at the right price that I'm willing to pay. But it's stuff like, Camo Con. I want Camo Con so bad. And Leo Faker. I have a Leo Skeletor. I have a Black Blood Mosquitor, which is like one of my prized pieces. But like Camo Con is the one that I want the most. So it's just like eventually one of these days, one of these days.
Here's a question for you as the man who literally wrote the book, because I feel like I have struggled to find this out definitively.
Sure.
Orko was Gorpo in Brazil, correct? That's the one country where he had a different name. I think it was Brazil. There was one country where he was named Gorpo instead because in that country there was some other character. Yes, he was forced. Right. The G didn't mirror and the cells were right. So this was the whole thing. He was Gorpo originally when they were developing the show. And then they realized.
Well, I knew that, but I don't think I knew that there was a figure version of that.
Well, this is my question. So on the cartoon, in whatever, I believe it was Brazil, they dubbed him over as Gorpo. He is referred to as Gorpo in the animation in that one country. And the thing I'm constantly trying to find out is there a vintage figure with Gorpo on the package? Because I don't think
I've ever seen that. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't feel like
I've never seen it either. And I'm constantly scanning to make sure it's not out there before I go crazy trying to find it. Because I have an Origins with Gorpo on the package. There are some of the other products that got released in Brazil at different points in time where there are Gorpo packaging variants, which have become now. Those are like my Camo Cons now. Yeah,
the international stuff is wild, and that was a rabbit hole. Yeah, that was when I was working on this book. Like we specifically decided like we had to talk about North American release stuff only, but we dove into a little bit of the international stuff because we wrote an article and we photographed a lot of the prominent international stuff. But the more collectors that I would visit for this book, like I would start running into these guys who are solely focused on the international stuff, and it is just like the most amazing rabbit hole. It is dangerous for one thing. Like if it's something that you have a little bit of interest in, stay away from it because it's expensive and it's deep.
Yes. No, I'm forgetting the exact details of it, but there was something where in this one country there was another character that already existed on a different show named Orko. And so for that one country, they reverted back to the original name. dubbed it that way. And the
Wow,
question
that's
is just
wild.
how much of the merch has the name on
I was
the
saying in the comments there, it's apparently
Brazilian Portuguese dub.
There you
Yeah,
go. That's wild.
yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
We always,
So
I
I
just
think-
remember Gorpo was used as like a little mascot character on He-Man.org for a long time. It's sort of
Yeah.
like an anti-Orko character. And then,
Right.
I,
For the ancient one, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
unnamed one in classics.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Is like a riff on Gorpo. It's basically Gorpo
Yes.
without them calling him Gorpo. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have there are the sort of figural stampers. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I have, I think, one of those packaged on a Gorpo card, and I have a newer Origins figure on a Gorpo card, and those are the only two I've been able to find. Exactly. Yeah.
I have a Battle Cat sitting right here in my studio.
You don't have the ride-on Battle Cat, right?
Oh,
the
he
ride
does.
on
I
Yes.
do.
sort of-
He
You
does.
Yes, I
do.
do.
Okay.
Yes.
I
do have
remember
that.
watching videos of you in the past debating whether or not to buy one.
I have
When
one
you
now.
threw them at Torches, you finally
It's
got
in
it.
my son's room upstairs, actually. It's
I
in my
mean,
youngest
yeah.
son's room.
That's a holy grail.
When I became a parent, I was like, I will now own that Battle Cat bouncer.
Right.
You
Whether it
have
will
to.
absolutely
You
happen.
have to.
And I
Right.
did.
Because you need
it's-
your scale He-Man child on it.
Yeah.
So it's gone through both my kids already. It's
Yeah.
in my youngest
That
room
rules.
now, and he still gets
Yeah.
on it and rides.
That rules.
It's awesome.
I should call out. I'm wearing. I have the Mattel creation.
People were asking. People were asking what
Yeah.
the
People
other
think
outfit is.
I don't wear chains under any other circumstances.
Well,
I
I
want to make it
recognize, like-
clear this is self-serving.
Yeah, you're dressed like Orko. I noticed.
And then
that
I
right
have
away.
this is I think Speaky Geeky or no, Speaky Geeky is the YouTube channel. This is Geeky Jerseys is the company that makes this. So I'm in my sort of my Kevin Smithified Orko attire with the backwards hat.
There
and
it
the
is,
hockey
yeah.
jersey. Yeah.
And several people did identify that in chat that you were homaging Kevin Smith.
I was. Yeah.
Hey, if you have any input into the narrative, the plots and stuff going forward, assuming the show actually gets picked up for another season, I'm just going to throw this out there. Clawful redemption arc. Maybe he's got a cool younger brother or something, comes in, makes amends for Clawful's past.
And you play Clawful's younger brother.
I don't have to play it. It's fine. Look, I'm not trying to get a job out of this or anything. I just want to see Clawful get
Pixel
his
plays
minute.
Mosquito. We're setting this up. No,
Look,
my
if you're
big
looking
one-
to save money, I assume that's why Ted played Gwildor, because they needed to chop like 10K out of the budget or something. So
there are various considerations. I will say, I mean, look, Teddy's like obviously a huge fan. He's basically a MOTU historian in his own right and loves Gwildor. And they sort of landed on the story thing of Gwildor and wrote him into the scripts before Teddy was even aware of it. And then it was sort of identified that Teddy does a pretty spot on Billy Barty impression. But I think he will say with full humility, he kept assuming they would replace him at some point. That it was like, well, I'm the producer. I'm doing a scratch track. Obviously, at some point, you'll hire another guy. But Teddy also had a background of like, he was primarily a voice actor for about 10 years. He started out as an animator himself, and then through working on animation, started doing voices and shows and had a pretty good voice acting career before he got into a far more lucrative career.
interesting.
Of
I didn't know
being
that. Yeah.
a top level honcho at Netflix. But so it's not a dalliance for him.
I didn't question it, like watching it, I was just like, hey, this person's doing a pretty good, like, I didn't know what they were going to do for Gwildor. I didn't know if they were going to try to actually get someone or just say, take it wherever you want to take it, just it's a new character. It's only been done once in the movie. Just do whatever you want with it. We're not going to try to do an impersonation of Billy Barty. But as far when I heard it, I was like, hey, this is great. And so I was shocked when I saw Ted's name in the credits.
Yeah. I think he's been very modest about it and has not been, I know he said, like, don't put me on the press releases with the cast announcements and things like that. But I think it's a really good performance. And I mean, that the interplay between Orko and Gwildor is just my favorite stuff in this.
You obviously knew he was playing that character when you were recording that scene, those scenes.
I did, which helped because it's like, as I'm saying, that's so much kind of like comedy banter between the two of them, and that's hard to do when you're not in the same room as the person. But to know that it was Teddy and I are friends now. I knew he had this good Gwildor impression, so I was like, I know what it's going to sound like. I can kind of guess how he's going to play it, and he's heard my Orko, so he can kind of guess how I'm going to play it. And you just sort of cross your fingers and hope it cuts together. No, my big thing, my whatever limited muscle I have to flex to try to influence them on season 3, if we're lucky enough to get it. I really, I want Driel very badly. That is my new push I'm starting internally.
All right. Well, we'll know when we see the trailer if Clawful and Mosquito pop up. We'll know where it started.
Clawful, Mosquito, and
Clawful's
Driel.
brother. Yeah.
Right. That's the test to know that I somehow was heard. I made myself
He
heard.
comes back as Lawful. Is what
They have to just sound like us, though.
Yeah.
Mosquito needs to just pop up and go, "Hey guys, I'm Mosquito."
That's a weird choice. Weird choice for Mosquito there. I thought he was going to sound like a bug, but he just sounds like Dan. That's weird.
I honestly think that's really cool. He's just doing all of your lines from the video.
It's blood Parison time. What does that even mean? I don't even know. What does he say?
Making stuff up. Guys, I appreciate both of you coming on tonight. We're about to hit 90 minutes here. It's been a fantastic conversation. Chat has been awesome. I appreciate everybody who's watched. Again, make sure you do hit that love button, hit that like button to share it on social. We talk about it on social media. This is YouTube. Everybody knows how to do this stuff at this point. But you really got to make some noise if you want that next season. If we want to see the next chapter of this stuff, it would be great if we can get a new one every year. But we'll take every 2 years as well. Dan, you got anything?
It takes so long. There's only so fast they can draw. Yeah.
Dan, you got anything coming up? I know you had a whirlwind tour of like 90 different conventions last summer. How's the schedule looking this year?
I was gonna say, like, I really haven't settled into like a schedule that I've announced yet for this year, but there's definitely stuff brewing that I will be doing. So just stay tuned, and I'll be announcing appearances and all that kind of stuff. But I also have other projects I really need to get wrapped up.
I was gonna say, I've heard it takes a few years to write a book too, as I understand.
Yeah, I'm trying to put some extra focus on some things I need to get done rather than all the convention stuff at this moment. So I might not be as around this year as I was last year, but I overdid it last year anyway. So just stay tuned to any of my socials or YouTube, and I will definitely make sure I announce any upcoming appearances or things you guys need to know about.
Perfect. Griffin, what do you got coming up?
I got MOTU Revolution rather, along with the best action figure of the year streaming. Thank you for reminding people to hit the button.
Always.
It's funny that it's all the same. Everything ends up reducing down to please like and subscribe.
Engage.
No matter what level of rung you're at. I host a podcast called Blank Check with Griffin and David, where we talk about movies. We pick a director and go through their whole filmography. And we're getting ready to do John McTiernan, who I think is kind of the unheralded, arguable best action director of all time, who did the first Predator, the first Die Hard, Hunt for Red October, and I had a kind of fascinating fall from grace career arc. So we're getting ready to do those, including Kevin Smith, a showrunner of these 2 seasons of the show, on an upcoming episode of that. And then I'm part of a comedy show called the George Lucas Talk Show, my friend Connor Ratliff, where he plays George Lucas and I play Watto. And we interview celebrities as themselves.
Did you ever think you'd get locked into that?
Did not think. No, absolutely not. I mean, the podcast and George Lucas, I think I've been doing both for about 9 years now, and I never thought either one would go longer than a couple months. Awesome. But we are doing a handful of shows. If anyone watching this stream lives in San Francisco, we're doing a couple shows at the San Francisco Sketch Fest next weekend, and the following week we're doing a handful of shows in Los Angeles, and yes, selling live stream tickets as well for those shows if you don't live in LA or San Francisco.
Excellent. All right. Thanks again. Thanks to chat. Thanks to Pixel Dan. Thanks to Griffin Newman. And I don't know when our next stream is going to be, but we'll announce it and come back and check it out, and we'll have some fun again. Thanks again. Later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.